Hello and welcome back to The Simple Storyteller. Today I'm going to read part 2 of our story called Under the Window by Grace Livingston Hill, which is in the public domain. I chose to come outside this morning. It's a beautiful morning and the birds are singing, and so it's a nice place to finish our book. Very early on Christmas morning, when few in the city were stirring, only the milk wagon or the baker's cart rattling over the frosty stones of the street, and now and then a sleepy clerk taking down shutters and opening doors. He was walking with a brisk step toward the flower store, kept by a little old lady of whom he had once or twice bought flowers to send his mother. He bought a wealth of roses this morning, great yellow roses, delicate saffrons, only halfway open, and buds of bon silence with their wonderful perfume. Then he selected a satin ribbon of faint green for the old lady to fasten them together with, and the whole was put in the prettiest white basket, well wrapped in cotton white tissue paper, and a card fastened to the handle, "For my friend Abbott, a very Merry Christmas." Then the young man walked with a smiling face and calmly deposited the basket on Mr. Samuel Updike's front step and retreated, wishing much that he dared to remain and watch the outcome. Polly, who was allowing herself nice long holiday sleep, slept on one little hand under a rosy cheek and never dreamed that there was something on her doorstep that would fill her with delight and wonder all that day and for many days after. But Abbott must have heard a noise, for he shivered a little, opening one eye at the dying fire, wondered why his mistress did not get up, then rolled to the edge of the rug nearest the fire and went back to sleep again. Polly did wake up by and by, made up the fire, and got breakfast. After breakfast, Abbott sat on the hearth, licking his whiskers and washing his paws, and thinking how very nice it was to have an extra saucer of milk, while Polly brushed up the room, opened the windows, and stood the hall door and the front door wide open. There was a basket. Polly's exclamation brought Abbott to the door. He thought it must be another milkman, and he always went to meet the milkman unless it rained. He sniffed around the basket and looked curious as his mistress while she read the card aloud. "Why, Abbott, it's a Christmas present for you, but who sent it? And what is it? Where did you get a friend that I don't know about? It certainly isn't Mr. or Mrs. Updike or Peter Kelly or the milkman, and now I'm sure I don't know who else knows you." "Oh, Abbott, I wish you could talk." Abbott tried to let her know by his eyes and ears, as well as a cat can, that if he could talk, he could give her no information on the subject. "Let's open it, Abbott." Thereupon the cat and the basket were transferred to the sofa. Amid many exclamations, the roses came to light, filling the little room with their elegant fragrance. Polly caught the cat up and kissed the very tip of his pink ears. It was dreadful, I know, but then Polly was very happy, and she had no one else to kiss. "You, dear cat, you shall invite your friend to the party. So shall if you will give the invitation." Perhaps Abbott understood, for he went to the door and sat looking out. Presently he walked down the steps over the snowy path, putting each paw down carefully, lest it might get too much mixed with the snow. When he reached the gate, he gave one spring to the top of the gatepost and paused a moment, looking up and down the street, and then, seeming to decide which way he would go, sprang down and trotted off as though he had business that would require his haste. Polly talked to everything that morning while she worked. She called to Abbott at the door that he should wear his green ribbon to the party, and that he looked back and wigged absent as he put the first velvet paw into the snow. She told the vases that they were dear, beautiful things, and that she was glad at last that they had something to hold them, for them to hold. And she hoped that they would keep them for a very long time. Polly worked fast, as was soon ready to go out to do her marketing and give her invitations. She decided to have her party at night because Mamie Bryce had to go down to Sycamore Street to take care of Mrs. Dobell's baby. while Mrs. Dobell went to a dinner party and she could not get back until 4 o'clock. So Polly told them all to come at 5, and their eyes shone brightly as they promised. It was beginning to grow dark. Little flurries of snow filled the air, and the young man, Porter Mason was his name, hurried along the street, hands in his pockets, collar turned up, and hat drawn over his eyes. He had been away off on other business at the end of the city on some good errand or other, and was cold and tired and hungry, and it was still a long walk home. He was wondering if he should dare to venture around to the alley again, when it grew quite dark, if the window blinds would be open, if he should see the roses anywhere, and if the party would be over. In a lull between the chime of sleigh bells came a faint meow, and he looked sharply around. The meow came more distinctly, and soon just ahead of him he spied a weary white form moving dejectedly through the fast falling snow. He stopped and picked it up. Brushing the snow off, he held it up to the light of a near street lamp. "I believe you are the very cat," he said, speaking aloud. "But how in the world did you get here? Is your name Abbott?" "Meow," said the cat. "All right then, you're my friend. Jump right in here and make yourself comfortable." He opened his big overcoat and tucked the cat snugly in. "I shouldn't wonder if I had my invitation after all," he told himself as he went on briskly. Within Polly Bronson's cheerful room, all was not as serene as might have been. The little party had assembled, and all were sitting on the edges of their chairs, undergoing the first embarrassment of arrival, but there was a shadow besides the embarrassment over them. The trouble was that 2 of them were missing, that one was the little guest Tim, and the other was the host himself, Abbott. Tim could not come because of his father was too drunk to carry him, and the streets were too slippery to trust him with his little crutch. His mother would have brought him, for it was his first bit of pleasure in many a day, but the poor soul, was on her back, scarcely able to wait on herself. Nobody knew what had become of Abbott. That was the way matters stood when Porter Mason rang the bell of the Updike house, which startled Susie and Mamie Bryce and Joey Wilkes when they all huddled together on one chair, like so many frightened peas in a pan when the pan is suddenly tipped up. Mr. Mason had gone straight to the little lane side window and found the shutters closed. Now, what should he do? Would it be safe to risk a peep in the front window? Suppose the real Abbott were inside, snug and warm by the fire. How foolish he'd feel to appearing at the door of a strange young lady in the dark of a snowy night and saying, "Have you lost a cat, madam?" without giving a reason for supposing that she had a cat. He stood in the snowbank again and thought, and the kitty purred under his warm coat. He might say that he had once, when passing, seen a cat in there. It wasn't the least likely that the young lady would question him as to the circumstances under which he had seen the cat, and she would in all probability suppose to have seen it on the doorstep. He concluded to risk this statement, and so boldly rang the bell. Polly hurried to the door. She was not in the habit of having evening callers. The door being opened let in such a whirlwind of snowflakes that Polly could distinguish nothing in the gathering darkness save the tall form of a man powdered with snow from head to foot. He was taking off his hat and saying in a pleasant voice, "Have you lost a cat?" As she said it, it cast an anxious glance through the half-open door to the glowing fireplace, and was relieved to see no cat there. "Oh, yes," her senses having come back to her. "Won't you come in? Do you know where he is? I found one on the street, and remembering to have seen one in your house, I brought it here." He was unbuttoning his coat now, and handed Abbott, warm and somewhat damp, to his mistress. "Oh, thank you so much," she said as she took him. "I'm so glad to get him back. I was so troubled about him when it began to snow so hard. I was afraid he was lost." She paused and looked up. Abbott's rescuer looked very cold and blue as he stood there in the chilly hall. Perhaps he had come out of his way to bring the cat, she thought. He had a chilly feeling in his heart too, as he began to think that it was time that he should say, "You're quite welcome, good evening," and bow himself out and go out to his cold, dingy room. He seemed to see the supper, which would presently be called remnants of the departed dinner. He glanced again into the cheery room and then was about to bow his good evening when Polly's voice interrupted. "Won't you come into the fire and get warm? You must be very cold." Polly never thought of being afraid to ask the stranger in. She was never afraid of anything. She was 22 years old and had taken care of herself for nearly 5 years. She felt as if nothing in the world could harm her. Then there were the children, and she had a secure sense of Peter Kelly in his back chamber over the kitchen. Besides, had not this stranger done her a kindness, and did not she owe something to him? And he had kind eyes and a gentle hand with the kitten. There were always reasons enough when a bright girl does anything, but she was surprised then when, instead of saying "No, I thank you," he hesitated and said, "May I?" Polly, with glowing cheeks, ushered her caller into the bright room and seated him in the rocking chair, hardly knowing what to make of him or what to do with him when she got him there. But the children helped her with their gleeful exclamations over the lost and found cat. Abbott, however, slipped from their caressing hands and retired to the hearth to bathe. He was a neat cat and did not appear before company with his white coat all stiff and rough. "Where did you say you found him?" questioned Polly. Mr. Mason did not say, but launched into a full description of Abbott's pitiful cries and forlorn appearance, until the question was forgotten in a merry round of laughter in which Polly joined in spite of herself. Although she had determined to be very dignified, "Oh," cried Susie when the laughter had somewhat subsided, "wouldn't he be having just a lovely time if Tim were here?" "Yes," said Mamie, and the laughter all sobered out of her face. "He stood at the top of the stairs and cried when we came down, and even a stout little Joey Wilkes said it was just too awful mean for anything to leave him." "And who is Tim?" asked the strange visitor as soon as there was any chance for him to speak. The children burst into full explanation of the case, all together, of course, and it was some time before he could understand. Even then he was being left in doubt as to whether more sorrow had been felt for Abbott, for the little Tim was with his drunken father. He arose at last and turned to Polly. "Having brought back one of the missing guests, it becomes needful that I should go complete my good work and bring the other. It would be a pity to have the perfection of this party spoiled by the shadow of an absent guest. Can you direct me to where to find this boy?" He buttoned up his coat, and as the children danced for joy and clapped their hands, crying, "Goody, goody," Polly's face was a beaming over all of this pleased surprise, but she tried to draw up her slipping cloak of dignity and say, "Oh no, you really must not go out in the trouble of this stormy night for us." Mr. Mason, however, would listen to no such talk and obtained the desired information. He turned to go and then stumbled, fumbling in his pockets, but as no card would be found, he produced a bit of folded pasteboard, saying, "I have no card with me, but will this do as well? My name is the 4th on the list of leaders, and when I come back, we'll get Tim to introduce us." When the well-known letters YPSCE met her eyes from the cover of the card, and below, Hartford Square Church, a little smile played over her face. So careful now that she knew so much about him, turning to the next page, she ran over the list of leaders and their subjects, especially the 4th one. She laid the card on the shelf and went back to her oil stove. The pudding was just taking on the last delicate shades of brown and needed watching. She hastened to set her table, putting one more place on, for she told herself she supposed that the young man must be invited for supper after he'd taken so much trouble for them. Then she thought of Peter Kelly. Now Peter was of that nondescript age when one does not know what to call him. It seemed strange to designate him as a young man, and yet he was not yet a boy, nor an old man, nor even a middle-aged man. Yes, he certainly must be a young man, but it seemed odd to call him that. He had colorless hair, expressionless eyes. The world had not used him badly indeed, but it had not used him much at all either way. He had not used it. Therefore, he had no identity with it. Peter was connected with the Hartford Square Church. That is, he swept the floors and looked after the rooms. He was, in short, the janitor. Remembering this, she filled a plate with some baked beans and one slice of the delicate toast that stood ready for the hot oysters, and pouring a cup of steaming coffee, she went with swift steps to the back chamber and knocked. So this part is a little bit wordy, and he has an accent, so just bear with me if I stumble over this even more. The front legs of Peter's chair came to the floor with a bang, and he sat with his mouth wide open, staring at the door. Giving his gruff, "Come in," Polly entered, setting down her burden and saying rapidly, "I've brought you some of my baked beans. They're hot, and I thought that you might like them, Peter." She never knew what sort of things he stammered out. She was busy thinking how she should put her question. "Peter, do you know anyone at the Hartford Church by the name of Mason?" This was as near the name as she would come. She would not have dared so much if he had been like some people, but talking to Peter was much like talking to Abbott. He would never put two and two together or wonder why she had asked such a question. "Well, yes," said Peter, diverted his astonishment. "There's two of them. There's John, he's a carpenter, and there's Porter, he's a lawyer." "I reckon you mean him. Is he tall and handsome, great big eyes and black hair, and alas, a good word said, just so he's to help most?" "I think he must be the gentleman I have met," Polly said demurely. "Well, he's a mighty nice feller. He gave me a ticket to a church supper once the other evening. He's awful smart too, and good. They do say he wouldn't have nothing to do with a case Judge Granger gave him 'cause he thought it wasn't right. And he ain't rich neither, but you just ought to hear him pray. There's, alas, a big meetin' up at CE when he leads." Polly had all the information she wanted now and made good haste to get away, amid a shower of rough thanks from Peter. She went gleefully to her room and found the children so busy with the picture book that they scarcely noticed her absence. So she knelt by the fireplace and stroked Abbott. Now that he was dry and smooth, Polly tied the rich green ribbon around his neck. To the much delight of the children, she stuck a saffron bud in the bow and set him upon the stool. There he sat, the long ends of the shining satin ribbon reaching his toes, holding his chin very high, either from the choking sensation of the broad ribbon or his pride in rich apparel, probably pride, for he seemed quite contented and sat purring as the children with his eyes half closed. Porter Mason, with a happy Tim mounted on his shoulder, came to a sudden halt before a large fruit store. "Tim, would you like to take Miss Bronson a Christmas present?" he asked. They'd been talking all their way along, and Tim had said he loved her best, next to his mother, in all the world. They were pretty well acquainted by this time, so Tim answered, "You bet I would." "All right, we'll go in there, and you shall choose what it shall be." It almost took Tim's breath away to see so many good things together, but after grave consideration, he pointed to a box of great white California grapes. You might have thought Mr. Mason extravagant for a man who wasn't rich if you heard his order to the clerk, but little Tim was very happy, and his companion looked none the less so. Miss Bronson said to Mr. Mason after they were fairly well in, Tim had presented his gift. Is the courier allowed to stay to the party, or must I go outside and paw the pavement until my services are needed again? Or I might go off and come back at a certain hour. What could Polly do but give him a gracious invitation? So she took his coat and hat into the hall, and he made himself quite at home, telling the children stories and giving them such a wonderful time, while Polly cooked the oysters that they forgot how hungry they were. They had a great time getting seated at the table. Polly actually ventured to borrow four of Mrs. Updike's best split-bottomed chairs, and they all went after them except Tim and Abbott, who sat and smiled at one another while they were gone. But they were seated at the last, and they came a moment that Polly was not altogether prepared for. She had meant to ask for a blessing. She always did when by herself, and wanted not to leave God out before these children and on Christmas night. But there was his stranger. Could she ask him? Polly's daring spirit came uppermost. She looked up and said quietly, "Will you ask the blessing?" Then, what a light of pleasure and surprise rushed into the eyes that met hers. He bowed his head, and in his few earnest, clear-spoken words to God astonished the children more than his stories had done. They were evidently not used to this. While Polly was pouring out coffee, Mr. Mason questioned the children and found that they knew almost nothing at all about Christmas. So he promised to tell them the true story of it after tea, and they gave themselves up to the delight of their plates. Miss Bronson promised to sing some too, said Susie Bryce, with her mouth full of beans. Now Polly did not intend to keep this promise with the stranger here to listen, so she passed him the sugar and then asked him if he would have some more oysters. The Indian pudding was hailed with joy and pronounced by Mr. Mason just as good as his mother's. Then they finished off with some of those luscious grapes. They were such a treat to Polly and to the children, something wonderful. Abbott had 3 oysters and enjoyed them as much as anybody. After supper, while Polly was clearing off the table, the children had their story. Polly was going about her work very softly, that she might lose none of it, told herself that she did not wonder that they liked to come to the meeting when he led, if he talked like that. When he finished, she sat down very quietly, but the story was just closing, and Mr. Mason turned to her and said, now we have that song, Miss Bronson." Polly did not intend to sing to him. She had "no" written all over her pretty flushed face, despite the children's eager pleadings, until Mr. Mason said, "I think I shall go out and stand in the snow after all, for I don't want the children to lose the pleasure because of me." Polly had to sing then, and though her voice trembled some, it was sweet and clear as she sang. "Little stars that twinkle in the heaven blue, I have often wondered if you ever knew how there rose one like you, leading wise old men from the east through Judah down to Bethlehem. Did you watch the Savior all those years of strife? Did you know for sinners how he gave his life? Little stars that twinkle in the heavens blue, all you saw of Jesus, how I wish I knew." Then Polly stopped, and she would not sing again for all their coaxing, for she had been too conscious of those eyes that had watched her so closely during the singing to try again. So she started some games, and then they had a frolic until the clock on the mantel warned them that it was getting late, and Mr. Mason told little Tim it was time for his carriage to take him home. The children sighed that the happy time was over. Tim was given some of the grapes and a rosebud or two for his sick mother. Polly bundled him up and gave each of the children a rose, and then they were ready to go. Mr. Mason gravely walked up to the fire where weary Abbott, in spite of his elegance, had succumbed to the warmth and the remembrance of the delicious supper. He had gone to sleep. But he was a polite cat, and as Mr. Mason came up to let him shake hands or pause with him, Tim was mounted once again on the shoulder. Polly's hand was taken for just a second, and I have enjoyed it all so much. May I come again soon and make a party call? Of course she had to say yes. And then, with Susie and Mamie just behind, Joey Wilkes scudding on ahead, they started out into the snow, and the party was ended. Yes, he came again very soon to make a call, and then he wanted to come again and again until it grew to be a settled thing for him to run in once or twice a week with a bit of a poem for her to read or a book to talk over. In those days, she had roses sent to her instead of her cat. She was taken out to a Sunday evening meetings quite often, and now and then to a concert or a lecture. Abbott was left at home, which he did not like after being alone all day. As spring came on, there were violets and anemones and once a lovely ride to the woods on a Saturday afternoon. Then a note came from a mother of a former pupil saying that her little daughter was very sick and could not live long. She wanted to have her dear Miss Bronson with her, which the doctor said would help. Would she come to them as soon as possible? Polly sighed, packed away her bronze clock, her marble vases, packed up the things that she must take with her, waited a whole day hoping that someone would call, then gave Abbott into the keeping of a quaint new neighbor. She gave a special direction to Mrs. Updike to say whomever called that she had been summoned to a sick friend and that would probably be back soon, and went. It was not a long journey, 50 miles or so, and the little pupil was very glad to see her. She grew no better as the days went by. It soon became evident that Polly could not be spared, for Bessie was not happy a moment unless her teacher was by her side. The mother was an invalid herself, who made her little girl worse by her melancholy speeches, so although Polly was longing to be home, she did not feel as if she ought to go. She stayed, and Bessie grew day by day weaker, but lingered on until the summer was dawning near its close, and the winter school term was about to begin. Then she slipped into heaven, leaving Polly, who had made the way bright for her, almost worn out with loss of sleep and confinement to the sick room. She scurried home to begin her school life again. She unpacked the clock and vases and reestablished Abbott, who walked round and round her, purring and rubbing his head against her, trying as best as he could to tell her that he did not like the boarding, and that was glad that she was home again. When Polly received the key to her room and asked if there had been anyone to call, she gained only a sentence about a man who kept a-comin', and that was all the news of home that she had. Porter Mason had been very lonely after Polly left. He had called many times to see her, but Mrs. Updike never knew her address, and now, just as Polly had come home, he had been called away on business. He had finally reached home. He found such a quantity of matters awaiting his attention that he had no time to think of doing anything for pleasure, so it happened that Polly had been home for 3 weeks without having once seen Mr. Mason. One evening she took Abbott in her arms and went to the front door. The air was chilly and hazy, as late September is apt to be. The stars were not nearly as bright as usual. They had no sparkle. They looked as if they had all gone away to spend the evening, and it had left a dim light in the window. It was lonesome and cold. She shivered and dropped a few tears on Abbott's thick coat. Through tears, she did not hear the brisk step coming down the street as she went in and shut the door, but they came on right to Polly's bright little window, which she had been so dark for so many a day, those same steps that had sounded down the street. And when Mr. Mason came in and took Polly's 2 hands in his own and held them, Abbott had his back turned, looking into the fire, and when he had made her quite comfortable on the sofa, he sat down beside her and told her something. But we must not hear of it. If you have heard such words yourself, you understand. If you have not, you wait until your turn comes to know. What they're saying is he was proposing, and if you've never been proposed to, then you have to wait for your turn. So it's kind of a play on words. But what did Polly say? Why did she say it to Mr. Mason? And no one heard, not even Abbott, for he was asleep and Mr. Mason never told. They both went to the cheerful home among the hills to spend their next holiday and make glad at the hearts of his dear father and mother and the dear brother and little sister and their other cat. Abbott, much to his disgust, was obliged to spend his holidays with the quaint little neighbor, and when his mistress came back, she took him to another part of the town to live, where all the familiar objects were all about him. There was a rug that he had always lain on, crocheted out of strips of silk, and the yellow stripes were the yellow ribbons that used to hold back the cheesecloth curtains. He thought it rather queer that Polly never went to school anymore, and that the tall stranger stayed all the time now. But he liked him, and so that was all right. He had all the beefsteak and milk and oysters that he wanted, and he could wear a green ribbon and rosebuds any day if he chose so. and he told the cats of the neighborhood. And so the old room had seen the story, has helped it along as it had helped many before, and stands again waiting all alone except for the big black spider who's hanging in her delicate draperies in all the corners. It waits for someone to enter and bring life and beauty to it again. The end. I really love that story. It's just a really heartwarming story, and I appreciate you watching and listening and visiting us. Thank you so much.